J'ai 3 questions très rapides.
À qui?
À tous les 3.
Tous les 3, d'accord.
Quand vous parlez de diabolisation, si je comprends bien, il y a un diable et un bon Dieu. Alors, pour moi, le diable, c'est celui qui fait toujours le mal. Alors, ma question, est-ce que les fabricants d'armes sont les diables et ceux qui achètent sont le bon Dieu? Il faut acheteur, vendeur. La question à vous, et c'est extraordinaire, quand vous parlez d'avoir confiance aux lois européennes, lesquelles ça me pose problème. Par contre, pour la question entre l'Ukraine et la Russie, ce matin, on a parlé de souveraineté. 1. 2. Vous savez que bientôt, il va faire très froid. Et si la Russie ferme le robinet de gaz, ceux qui souffrent, ce sont les pauvres. 2. Il y a les conflits comme cela, il y a des sanctions terribles. Et vous savez, les sanctions commerciales, c'est en ce moment la France qui souffre. Tous les vendeurs de légumes, tous les fruits, qu'est-ce qu'ils vont les faire? Ils les jettent dehors. Est-ce une solution? Monsieur, quand vous parlez des choses extraordinaires, je suis d'accord avec vous, mais je ne comprends pas tout ce que vous avez raconté. Quelle est la solution que vous proposez pour les conflits? Vous n'en avez pas. Voilà. Vous n'en avez pas, donc on va prendre le droit international. Et quel est ce droit international dont nous parlons depuis 2 jours?
C'est ma question. Annick.
Merci beaucoup. C'est juste une remarque, enfin c'est pas une question. Paolo, si ça va, si je parle lentement, tu as dit qu'en Israël, il n'y a pas du tout de mouvement contestataire. Je voudrais juste corriger un tout petit peu parce que il y a, enfin moi je reçois chaque semaine la chronique d'un juif allemand, Uri Avneri, qui écrit de 91 ans ou 92 ans, qui écrit des choses absolument très très fortes, hein, c'est un témoin de toute l'histoire d'Israël et qui a vraiment des choses extraordinaires sur Gaza, etc. Il y a les mouvements Gush Shalom. Nous avons été avec Ken Brown, qui est là, en Palestine avec Stéphane et Christiane Essel. Et là, on a rencontré les parents endeuillés. Il y a des choses. Alors, je sais très bien que c'est minime, mais je me demandais simplement, puisque ce que tu disais surtout, c'est qu'il faut se parler davantage, il faut sortir du confinement. Est-ce qu'on ne doit pas, un peu aider ces mouvements à se renforcer, voilà, hein, parce qu'il y a des ébauches, hein, et ils sont tout à fait respectables. Moi, parfois, je lis des choses, je dis, il faut les remercier, ces gens-là. Ils sont très courageux.
Justement, je veux 2 fois par année, au minimum, en Israël.
I'm going to speak in English for the comfort of our panelists and play a bit the devil's advocate in terms of the reference you've been using from the beginning about diabolization. But perhaps not so much. I think probably everyone here has similar feelings about the onslaught by Israel on Gaza. So my question is, what about looking elsewhere? What about, for example, the blocking by Egypt of its frontier during the massacre? No, I trawled internet, found nothing, really nothing, no articles, nothing written. Because of the anger, perhaps, that the government that took over and killed a couple thousand, as many Egyptians as Gazans died in that onslaught. They were angry, maybe, at the Hamas support of the Muslim Brotherhood. I don't know, but no one talked about it. Meanwhile, you see the Turks, who aren't exactly friends of the Kurds, opening its borders to tens of thousands of refugees at the moment. What about that front? I saw an incredible mobilization in the streets, but not in front of Egyptian embassies around the world. My first question, and I'd be interested to know what Pugwash thinks about that. Secondly, 6,000 killed a month for the last 3 years, 3 times more than the entire onslaught by Israel of Gaza. I'm talking, of course, about the Syrian civil war, with probably an equal number of civilians and children who've died. So what I'm questioning also is, you talked about diabolisation, it's not really an English word. What about angélisation on the other side? Palestinians and Gazans aren't unique. Where did the Sarajevans have to go when they were blockaded? Where do the the people of the Central African Republic have to go, the Muslims? They're 1 million when they are being attacked. Gaza, and the other Palestinians with whom I've sympathized and been and supported don't have the monopoly of horrors and misery, and it can actually be a sabotage of a campaign in support of the legitimate rights of the Palestinians to say that they are the worst. When again, Mrs. Issel saying that there's no precedence in the history of it, I'm sorry, like we've had dozens of precedents. So my question is, really, is it not counterproductive to make martyrs out of the Palestinians? Again, I think we all have we all are on the same side, but these are real questions I ask myself. And I think that we should applaud the Palestinians for putting on the agenda. It's in the middle of summer, silly season for the media. The horrors so it shows that they are very effective in sensitizing both the media and the public. Thank you.
Ici.
Oui, j'aurais...
Après.
On entend là? Oui, après. Une position un peu peut-être inverse, c'est-à-dire que je pense qu'Israël est dans l'Europe, en fait, puisque du point de vue commercial et du point de vue des subventions, Israël est vraiment dans l'Europe. Et l'Europe, les pays européens n'ont même pas accepté des enquêtes de l'ONU sur Gaza. Donc je pense que moi je poserais plutôt le problème de l'application simplement des droits de l'homme par l'Union européenne, ce qui pose... Et du fait que j'ai l'impression que si ça ne marche pas, c'est parce qu'on est structuré par un racisme qui fait que les enfants de Gaza ne sont pas des enfants, quoi, ni pour les médias, ni pour les politiques. Donc, je pense que la question n'est pas de décider si les Palestiniens sont des martyrs ou autre chose. La question est de nous interroger, nous, l'Union européenne, puisqu'ici nous sommes dans l'Union européenne. Donc, balayons devant notre porte. Et qu'en est-il de notre application des droits de l'homme?
Donc, là-bas, il y avait une question. Là-bas. Ça fait longtemps qu'il demande. Là-bas. Allez-y.
Oui, c'est juste une remarque à propos des hésitations de Katarina Simonen sur finalement la base si je l'ai bien comprise, la base de la réaction de l'Union européenne à l'encontre de la Russie. Elle semblait hésiter beaucoup quant à savoir si la Russie s'était rendue coupable de quelque violation que ce soit du droit international. Personnellement, je ne partage pas du tout ces hésitations. Quand on soutient militairement un mouvement rebelle contre un gouvernement, ça s'appelle intervenir dans les affaires d'un autre pays. Quand on fait pénétrer ses troupes sur le territoire d'un autre État pour aider ce mouvement rebelle, ça s'appelle intervenir militairement dans les affaires intérieures de notre pays, et ça s'appelle ne pas respecter le principe du non-recours à la force dans les relations internationales. Et quant à l'annexion de la Crimée, il faut voir les choses sous un autre angle. Ce n'est pas tellement la question de la sécession, où là je partage ce qu'elle a dit sur la position assez ouverte du droit international. La question, ce n'est pas tellement celle-là, la question c'est celle de l'annexion de la Crimée par la Russie. Et je préciserai simplement que cette annexion a été condamnée en termes tout à fait explicites par l'Assemblée générale des Nations unies, qui a estimé qu'elle était contraire au droit international et qui a invité, qui a demandé aux États et aux organisations internationales de ne pas la reconnaître et de ne pas lui donner l'effet juridique. Alors j'ai bien souvent des doutes sur les fondements des actions européennes sur le plan international, mais ici j'en ai pas beaucoup par contre.
Bon, une dernière question, s'il vous plaît. Après, on va essayer de répondre rapidement les uns et les autres.
Moi, ma première question, c'est, je voudrais vous demander...
Rapidement, s'il vous plaît, parce que là, on prend du retard. Assez rapidement, si vous pouvez.
Oui, oui. La diabolisation a visé d'abord Nasser, Kadhafi et Saddam. Pourquoi uniquement des Arabes? La deuxième question que je voudrais poser à Paolo, c'est en ce qui concerne l'Arabie saoudite. Je crois que les peurs de l'Arabie saoudite ne sont pas tellement religieuses. Ce n'est pas parce que l'Iran est chiite ou les véritables moteurs derrière l'Arabie saoudite est la peur de la démocratie. La preuve, c'est que dès qu'il y a eu des problèmes le 14 janvier 2011, Ben Ali n'a pensé qu'à une chose, c'est partir comme Amin Dada à Jeddah, n'est-ce pas? Et à l'heure où je vous parle, il y a une cinquantaine de collègues universitaires saoudiens qui sont en prison. Et pourquoi ceci? Eh bien, tout simplement pour que la manne pétrolière ne profite qu'aux 6 000 princes saoudiens. Donc, la véritable peur de l'Arabie saoudite, ce ne sont pas les problèmes religieux, c'est d'abord la démocratie.
Bon, merci donc à tous. Bon, je propose on donne la parole à chacun de nous trois, brièvement, pour répondre dans l'ordre que vous voulez. Peut-être Paolo?
Oui, merci. Diabollo means to trick. Okay, it's not bad. It's not the bad thing. Diabolos means tricking, and that's what we are tricking. There is a trick, a person who tricks all of us. There are many tricks. First trick, think that weapons producers are the bad guys. They are maybe the bad guys, but they are not the guys who start everything. They are not the Martians coming from outside the outer space, come here and then push us to be bad, while we would be very good. No, that's not the case. The weapons producer and sellers are taking profit of the situation. Okay? Different. Very much different. So, and there is no Israel. I agree, Nick, for sure. I mean, there are lots of, what I'm saying is that, I mean, in this kind of conversation, you cannot be too detailed. But the point is that, let's say, there was an interest for peace in Israel. There was empathy for the Palestinians that disappeared. There is something left, good. We all do all our best to support it. But we have to understand that it shrunk dramatically. And this is the result of many things. Of course, the Intifada #1 and #2 did not good, since they feel pure. But also, this has been preserved by the total isolation. So total isolation means that people, if you're living in Jerusalem and you cannot go Ramallah, 10 kilometers away, you don't know what's going on there. I remember distinctly sitting in Ramallah, and there was a guy pointing out to me to the settlement and saying, I really want to understand what the people there think about us. So the idea is that there is, when it's separated, it's totally separated, you don't have any feeling. It's like, they are like Martians. So if they are killed, that's okay. I mean, this is the reciprocal. It's not just, that was my main point. Isolation is very important. Egypt, I said exactly the opposite. I mean, I said exactly that Egypt has been very much responsible for the situation of Gaza. And I think that, in fact, it's even more difficult now to go through Egypt than to go to Eretz, I mean, the Israel border. Yes, I mean, this is this has been the coup, the result of the coup in Egypt, which has been mildly, not so much, supported by the West, but certainly supported by Saudi Arabia, which provided money, and they, in fact, Saudi Arabia, someone has mentioned Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia, as every country, is a complex one. But the point is that not so much the lack of democracy, it is an important factor, yeah. But the point is that there is an ideologically dominant ideology in Saudi Arabia, which is Wahhabism, which is a specific brand of Islamic radicalism, which is essentially antagonist to many others. You see, if you want to make things a little bit rough, The Muslim Brotherhood is something which is in between religious / socialist movement, para-socialist movement, element of social. Read Sayed Qutb, who came from the United States back to Egypt, and then he was bringing some idea about the problem of capitalism, mixing everything else. It's a different approach. Wahhabism is very religious, strict movement. Saudi Arabia, since they have a very little control, the central, it's not so much the lack of democracy, it's the lack of real control from the center. They understand that they don't have the instrument to control the people, the country. So they are very much afraid of everything which is not controllable, and very much against anything that is outside the main dominant ideology, which is Wahhabism. And that's the reason why the ISIS is not supported by Saudi Arabia as a state, but is supported by the people, by some rich people in the Saudi Arabia. Yes, in that sense you can say oil is sure, money. And the motivation for this is nothing but ideological. They want to support people that think like them. So these Wahhabis, which are in the Islamic State, they are essentially killing enemies. Enemies are other Muslims, not so much the Westerns. Now, in Syria, someone was mentioning Syria, of course. I mean, we are not discussing about Syria is not a piece of cake. I did not have time to discuss about everything else. But the point is that Syria is a very complicated situation. And to be honest about Syria, the government of Syria has its own responsibility. The West has been supporting groups that had really almost no influence, like the Free Syrian Army. They left small cities like Homs isolated, without helping them to get out, since these are encircled, and they did not realize, the West, that in the same time this ISIS monster was growing. There was no forecast. No forecast. What helped the ISIS movement growing? The fact that they had a very serious smuggling procedures. And why there is a smuggling procedure there, which were able to bring in weapons and take out oils and other goods. Since the southern part of Turkey is smuggling. Everything is smuggled through there. And so it's very difficult to understand what is coming from, what it is, and then they build up their own power in this. And this is something which I recently discussed with some very high-level Iraqi. He will say, well, before there was smuggling, the Kurdistan was smuggling things now. So it's a situation. Now it's very difficult. Turkey, what? Since he antagonized Assad, well, they were not, in fact, looking into the details. They were not caring about who was opposing Assad. Anybody would do. So they help also on their own way to build up this monster. Now, the monster should be, first of all, I think, understood, since there is an element in this monster that people do not think about carefully, and is the way in which they deal with their own population, their own faithful. They kill the others, but they try to protect their own. The similar thing which happened with the Taliban. So one has to understand that they are creating not only a power structure, but they are creating supporters. And this is something that should be carefully handled. You don't want to throw everything in the basket, in the same basket. Palestinians, what's the difference between Palestinians and the others? I think Palestinians, with respect to other situations, have some basic. First of all, it's a long-term issue. I mean, it's something which is good. They have been there for years. Second, is a problem when the West has a specific responsibility. And since we are living in the West, I mean, I'm Italian, you are French, we speak in English, that's okay. But we have, we are in a sense more responsible than in other situations. So we have to take care of this. Plus, it's a little bit, I would say, symbolic, in the sense that, look, this is something which goes on for decades. The only analog I can see is Kashmir, and really there has been no serious attempt ever to solve the problem. we are talking about Israeli-Palestinian conflict, we should talk about occupation. Now, what is this occupation? I mean, occupied territory have their own rights according to international law. Where is again the international law? Nowhere. So, it's a different thing. In Syria, of course, there is also a lack of many things, including lack of application of international law. But I think in Israel and Palestine is outstanding, and we have international law said that if a country occupies other territory, it's not part of his own, then they have right to protect the people there of the territories, and they're not doing this, as is shown in Gaza. So we have here a very high-level democracy by Western standard, Israel, which is in fact making fun of the international law. And is the same country, incidentally, Israel, which is the only country in the world which is not member of the 3 chemical, biological, and nuclear agreements. So that's something that we should, it's only country. North Korea is part of the biological agreement, the biological convention. So we have to understand that we, being in the West, having closer relation with Israel, we should avoid to be trapped into this Semitism, anti-Semitism, and say, look, what are you doing? What are you doing? Thank you.
Donc, merci. Bon, je vais faire un bref commentaire. Bon, je ne répondrai pas à toutes les questions. Je crois que ça a déjà été fait. Ça sera à nouveau par Katharina. Je vais juste reprendre un point sur la question concernant l'Ukraine, enfin les commentaires concernant l'Ukraine. Bon, c'est une question j'aurais voulu qu'on discute, mais elle n'a pas été discutée jusqu'à présent. C'est la question d'un peu de l'opposition. C'est une manière d'en discuter, d'opposition qu'il y a, y compris au sein des Nations Unies et du droit international, sur d'un côté le droit des peuples à disposer d'eux-mêmes, et d'autre côté donc le principe d'intangibilité des frontières. Alors en ce qui concerne l'Ukraine, bon, la Crimée est un problème spécial. C'était une terre russe depuis des siècles, hein, et qui avait été, lors de la dissolution de l'Union soviétique, elle avait été rattachée à l'Ukraine pour des raisons purement administratives à l'époque de l'Union soviétique. Et après la fin de la guerre, après la fin de la guerre froide, bon, il se trouve, bon, comme ça, pour des raisons historiques, elle a été rattachée alors que c'était quand même une terre essentiellement russe. Bon, alors je n'approuve pas, je dis pas que j'approuve pour autant ce qui s'est passé, mais enfin, c'est quand même vrai que, disons que ça correspondait, le référendum qu'il y a eu en Ukraine correspondait quand même aux souhaits, non pas de tous, mais d'une majorité de la population. Et quant aux populations russophones de l'Europe, de l'Ukraine de l'Est, bon, je crois que c'est vrai qu'a priori, elle faisait partie de l'Ukraine, donc a priori intervenir militairement en faveur des séparatistes ukrainiens pouvait être considéré comme une violation du droit international. Alors évidemment, la Russie a nié être intervenue militairement. Bon, d'accord, elle est probablement intervenue, je suis bien d'accord avec vous. Ça dit, bon, je rappellerai simplement ce que je disais hier. Je citais Laurent Fabius, ministre français des Affaires étrangères, qui en fin 2012, quand la France a livré officiellement, c'est ce qu'elle a déclaré, des armes à l'opposition armée syrienne, disait qu'aucun droit international ne pouvait empêcher d'aider les résistants à se défendre. Et de même, Laurent Fabius, maintenant, il y a un mois ou deux, a déclaré quand la Russie a été accusée d'être les séparatistes ukrainiens, que c'était une violation inacceptable du droit international. Bon, donc en d'autres termes, chacun, comme je disais hier, a les terroristes et les résistants qui souhaitent. La situation en Ukraine aurait dû... Bon, le problème de Crimée est différent, mais pour le reste, à propos de l'Ukraine, les résolutions de l'Assemblée générale, évidemment en question dont on a parlé, ne sont pas contraignantes. Hein. Comme la plupart d'ailleurs des résolutions du Conseil de sécurité et de l'Assemblée générale, elles ne sont pas contraignantes. Bon, donc ça a une valeur évidemment très forte, mais sans plus. Et en ce qui concerne l'Ukraine, bon, on aurait pu résoudre le problème par le dialogue depuis longtemps. Alors j'aurais une question à Katharina d'ailleurs. Le Parlement, quand il y a eu des événements donc à Kiev à l'époque, le Parlement, sous la contrainte de milices armées et en l'absence de pas mal de députés, a effectivement décidé de destituer l'ancien président ukrainien qui avait été élu en 2010, et en même temps a décidé l'interdiction de la langue russe comme seconde officielle dans les régions d'Ukraine de l'Est. dans les régions de l'Est de l'Ukraine. Cette décision, je crois, a été suspendue. Je ne sais pas si elle a été annulée. Je suppose qu'elle sera dans le cadre d'un accord, si l'accord effectivement a lieu. Il semble évident qu'il aurait dû y avoir dès le départ une solution par le dialogue, avec les régions d'Est restant à l'intérieur d'Ukraine, mais avec un statut spécial et possibilité d'interaction avec la Russie, ce qui est d'ailleurs, je crois, maintenant envisagé. Je ne sais pas exactement où ça en est, peut-être Katharina pourra nous le dire, mais pour ça, pour qu'il y ait un dialogue et qu'on arrive peut-être à une solution pacifique, il aura fallu la guerre, organisée par le gouvernement de Kiev, au lieu d'entamer le dialogue, ce qui est quand même regrettable. Voilà. Katharina.
Ok. Alors, je vais vous répondre plus tard. Mais je vais adresser trois questions. Donc, d'abord, professeur Klein. Donc, sorry, yes. I was talking about the legal qualifications as an example of the environment in which the Council has to make up its mind. I haven't done my own. I don't have an opinion on that in general. I know Russia violated many aspects of international law, but I was just giving an example because this argumentation will come up in the court, Russia's and so forth. So it's wise to know it and to prepare for it when you prepare your legal actions. However, what caught my eye was the qualification in July, because we are all agree that Russia violated the Ukrainian sovereignty, territorial integrity, and so forth. It's a crime under international law, intervention, aggression perhaps even under the qualifications of the GA Resolution 3314. But why on earth did the European Union Council have to adopt two single and independent entries in these sanctions resolutions? Because I haven't looked at the sanctions listings, but what I'm saying is that if one of the oligarchs is listed under the heading stability or security in Ukraine, the link is not so clear as if he is listed under having participated in actions which threaten and undermine integrity and so forth. So the link is not clear. Or if he is listed under the obstruction of the work of international organizations, it's not so clear. So there might be a problem, but this we will be seeing in practice if some of them contests the legal basis. I presume these qualifications were because something had to be done. The previous qualifications, actions which undermine the Ukrainian sovereignty had been already adopted in March. They were already there. Then we had the airline incident. Something more had to be done. So I think there was the political pressure. And in Finland, actually, we had a lot of discussion about this. And because I have also a governmental hat. So I am lucky to hear also the governmental views. And they said that it was very poor preparation at the council because many people were away and so forth, but something had to be done. So if this is the truth and somebody is going to contest it, we'll see what happens. This is just an academic point of view. Secondly, the significance of European law. What law? I think it's been significant in the sanctions, when they have adopted sanctions and they have listed persons or companies, because the sanctions practice at the United Nations has been very, very bad. The sanctions committees have been totally untransparent. Those who have been listed have had practically no means to contest. Now, because the European Union courts have paid attention, have said, no, you have to have a fair trial, rights of the defense have to be respected. You have to give a right to respond, to contest. Also, the United Nations have been working on to better their listings. So there is it's a little betterment. Not much, but it's a little betterment. You cannot just be listed and, And one curiosity is I'm following with great interest how the Bank Melli case is advancing, the Iranian National Bank, because they've been very, very insistent, and so far they won. And they won also at the UK Supreme Court. And if they will win now at the European Court of Justice, the final, they have threatened to sue the UK for damages for an amount which is not non-negligible. So I'm following with great intent, because that can be a practical reason for overstepping what we consider legal. No? Oui, oui. Last one, we have on peut en parler. Last one, because I know the time is pressing, about Israel and investment, arms trade to Israel. Theoretically, perhaps someday, because there is the Charter of Human Rights in the European Union. I've been speculating about that when the courts will pronounce on sanctions, if sanctions have caused human rights violations which are not acceptable under European Union law. But this thinking can be stretched also to the investment and arms trade. We'll see. There is a theoretical possibility, but we'll see. Thank you.
Okay.